Hello, MOA students and anybody else that's working from home today for whatever reason. It is Tuesday. It is the 9th. I had to look on my little calendar. The 9th of February, 2021. We are continuing on our unit about the Industrial Revolution and the cultural reform movements that come from it. And today's objective says, I could summarize the beliefs of new philosophical and artistic movements by taking notes on my digital interactive notebook and analyzing primary and secondary source material. So, hopping over to the classwork tab, you're going to notice that today you have a new Google form. I'll get to that in a minute, but we're going to start with our digital interactive notebook and our notes. So, in our interactive notebook, by now, you should have already done pages 2 and 3 last week. Page 4 and 5 we did in yesterday's video. If your page 4 and 5 is blank, you need to back up and go do those. Watch yesterday's video and do that. We're going to pick up with page 6 today, okay? And we're going to start with a group called the Transcendentalists. And we're going to talk about them twice. We're going to talk about them as a philosophy, and we're going to talk about them as an artistic movement because they happen to be both, right? We're not going to call them a religion, although they share some attributes of religious groups. And we'll get to that in just a second. So we're going to be on page 6 of our interactive notebook. And then let's go to our slideshow. And I can just scoot on through all my inventions. Then these are our notes from yesterday. And then we get here to Transcendentalism, a new philosophy. Okay, so this slide is going to be this gray flag here. This is what you need. So Transcendentalism doesn't count as a religion because Transcendentalists do not have an agreed upon set of ideas about whether or not there is a God, and if there is a God, what is God like? Some Transcendentalists were and are, because Transcendentalism is still around, atheists. Some consider themselves Christians. Some Transcendentalists consider themselves spiritual but not belonging to any religion. And some Transcendentalist ideas actually turn up in 20th century versions of Hinduism. Gandhi read American Transcendentalists like Henry David Thoreau, who's the guy here. So Transcendentalism is strictly speaking not a religion because you can actually belong to several religions or no religion at all, and yet believe in some transcendental ideas. Also, a lot of people buy into transcendental ideas without knowing that they're buying into transcendentalism. There's a lot of things that we view as just an American idea that have their roots here. So let's talk about the big philosophical ideas because they don't agree on God language and religious stuff. They agree on a desire to protect nature. Teddy Roosevelt, who becomes president in the late 1800s, he wants to protect nature. He's read some of these guys. He likes this idea of preserving nature and passing it down to future generations. Even as we build up cities and technology, it's not necessarily an anti-technology movement, although transcendentalists tend to be skeptical of new technology. But it is a sense that we should not lose the riches of the natural world while we build up this modern world. Now, some transcendentalists want to go all the way back to nature, but most say it's a both and. They encourage meditation, whether that's prayer, religious, or not. Just the idea that you should have some mindfulness, that you should stop and calm yourself and think about why do you do the things you do? Why are you reacting the way you're reacting? Just to center yourself and calm down. And here's the big takeaway that's very American. Transcendentalists emphasize the individual, that you have to define yourself and grab hold of your own destiny. And this is the big idea from transcendentalism that tends to permeate all of American society, even though most Americans can't spell transcendentalism, let alone identify it. So this is a sneaky place where you may hear in pop culture the idea of rugged individualism. This is a term that we borrow from the transcendentalists, and it sort of creeps into our American view of who we are as individuals. And so our big leader here is going to be a guy named Henry David Thoreau. He's not the only one. There were lots of transcendentalists. We'll talk about some more of them a few slides later when we talk about them as an artistic movement. But as a philosophy, these guys, they're going to emphasize protest and civil disobedience. The idea that if you don't like what the government's doing, you shouldn't lash out in violence, but you also shouldn't just roll over and take it. You should show up and you should protest and you should make your voice heard, and that might get you in trouble. And you're not going to hurt anybody, but you're also not just going to sit back and do nothing when you think the government is wrong. Thoreau gets himself in hot water at different points for some of his beliefs, refuses to serve in the Mexican-American War because he thought it was an unjust war. And his ideas about protesting and civil disobedience later get picked on by Mahatma Gandhi in India and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Here in the United States during the 1950s and 60s. So even though you've never heard of transcendentalism before, these ideas of rugged individualism, you need to figure out who you are and you need to make the most of your life. And this idea of civil disobedience. If the government's out there doing stuff you don't like, you should stand up and protest and make your voice heard. These ideas that are deeply rooted in American culture stem from this philosophy. So you've been exposed to it, even if you've never heard the name before. All right. So that slide gives you this top part. And then let's talk about utopianism. Well, the utopians, these are people who got very optimistic with all this new stuff going on. They thought maybe we can build a perfect world. So they tried. So utopian communities, people sold everything, moved to wherever the town was, and they started new lives together, trying to build a perfect place. Now, obviously, people are people, so we never get any perfect places because people mess things up. But these utopians, they were out there trying to do it. So one example, a famous one, is Oneida, New York. They had this idea of communal property. So they basically, they wouldn't have used the word socialism or communism, but that's sort of what it was. They also had this weird idea of complex marriage, meaning basically that every adult in town considered themselves married to every other adult in town. And this didn't work out well because they dropped this after a generation. And again, I'm going to keep this lecture G-rated because as the kids grew up, they didn't know who they were related to, and that's kind of a problem. So they got rid of this idea and went back to more traditional ideas of family and marriage. But the town stuck around, and they still have a silverware factory there today. And if you go to Target or Bed Bath and Beyond, or maybe your silverware drawer in your house, you will find silverware from the Oneida Silverware Company in Oneida, New York. It's one of dozens of these little utopian communities that pop up and experiment with different ways of organizing society. Right? Sort of like the hippies in the 1960s, just 100 years before. Very similar type things. Okay, so we've got that page done. And now we've talked about religion and philosophy. Well, our big ideas, religion and philosophy, tend to turn up in our artistic expressions. So now I want you to go ahead and pop onto this next page. And we've got three artistic movements that pop up in the 1800s, and they are very similar to artistic movements, still very much alive today. So we're going to talk about these three and get these notes. And notice the middle one, transcendentalism, is also tied to that philosophical group, right? Okay, so coming back to our slideshow, number one, we're going to define romanticism. And when I say romanticism, you start thinking smoochy, smoochy, kissy, kissy, right? Because when we say romance, this is what we think of. That's not really the whole story of romantic artistic expression. Romanticists emphasize inspiration, connection to nature, and an emphasis on positive and negative emotional experiences. So, yes, that means falling in love, right? But Love stories are one expression of romantic literature, or in the modern age, movie making, right? The romantic comedy is romanticism, but also scary stories. Edgar Allan Poe, all of these stories about murder and death and things that make you afraid. In our modern era, horror movies, scary movies. This is also romanticism, right? A lot of our scary movies have to deal with we've turned our back on nature, so something from nature comes to harm us. There's a monster out there that's trying to get us. There's a monster out there that threatens who we are. So if you think about things like A Quiet Place, things like that, this idea of romanticism and dealing with our negative emotions and you know our connection to nature being threatened by all our new technology. This is still very much reflected in Hollywood movies, TV shows, music, books. Um, so romanticism is still very much alive and well, and it means a lot more than kissy, kissy, smoochy, smoochy. So this is your definition, and your examples are Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne from this time period. So, definition and major art and artist, you've got that there. Pause the video. And now let's talk about some examples. So, here's Hawthorne, really sappy quote. I'm not a Hawthorne fan, just to be fair. Hawthorne says, "Happiness is a butterfly which, when pursued, is always just beyond your grasp, but which, if you will just sit down quietly, may alight upon you." Oh, what a nice idea that when we try too hard, we never get it. But when we relax and just accept who we are and what the world is, we find our contentment. Happiness comes to us. Very romantic idea. Slow down, smell the roses. But also a romantic idea. Poe, the scariest monsters are the ones that lurk within our souls. This is also a very romantic thought that part of the challenge we face is dealing with the darkness within. So when your English teacher talks about the different conflicts in the novel, and one of them is man or person versus themselves, this is what Poe's talking about. That we have forces within us that, sure, Hawthorne says it could be our own happiness and contentment, but Poe says it could also be the monsters we have to face that are inside us. It's a very romantic idea. Another one from Hawthorne. Nobody, I think, ought to read poetry or look at pictures or statues who cannot find a great deal more in them than the poet or artist actually expressed. Their highest merit is suggestiveness. Now, that's a fancy way of saying that what makes a piece of art beautiful is not necessarily what it meant to the artist, the songwriter, the painter, the movie maker. It's what it means to you. Think about your favorite song, right? Your favorite song probably has some connection to a moment in your life, somebody you care about, something you were going through. It's not just what the songwriter had on their mind when they made the song, it's the emotional connection you've made to this piece of art. This is very much in the idea of romanticism, is that art is not just to be experienced as a one-way conversation. The artist is talking to you and me. It's a two-way conversation where we take that piece of art and we give it our own meaning. All of us do that with our favorite songs, our favorite movies, our favorite books. This is the sort of thing the romantics were pushing us towards. All right. So you should have romanticism down. Now let's go to transcendentalism. And as an artistic movement, transcendentalism is an extension of romanticism. But the big difference is the emphasis on relying on yourself. Transcendentalist art is pushing you to be true to you, right? So, you think about stories that focus on the hero's journey. So, you think about Harry Potter, and it's all about Harry coming to grips with who he is. Or you think about the Star Wars saga, and it's all about, at least in the middle three movies, it's all about Luke discovering who he really is. In the sequels, it's all about Rey discovering who she really is. Transcendentalism is very much about this journey where you as an individual figure out who you are. Transcendentalists tend to be a little skeptical of new technology, and they want to resist too much government power. They're skeptical of big government. And Emerson and Thoreau are a big example. So again, your notes for that, you've got 2 boxes here. It's all on this slide. Pause it to get it. You can watch that video later. But to keep you, give you a really good idea of what transcendentalism is all about, I'll give you this one quote. If a man does not keep with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away. In other words, it's okay to be different. It's okay to stick out like a sore thumb. It's okay if you're not like everybody else, as long as you were being true to you. This is at the heart of the transcendentalist message. All right, one more. The Hudson River School and James Audubon. These are painters and drawers. So we're going to skip ahead. By the way, you can go see all this on the slideshow if you want more. So Hudson River School, romantic style of landscape painting that wants human beings to live in harmony with nature. Right. The idea here is to make beautiful pictures of nature so that you care about protecting the environment. James Audubon, instead of big, beautiful landscapes, gets down on individual birds and trees with the idea of preserving individual species, cataloging and preserving species. So, with the Hudson River School, we have Thomas Cole, Albert Bierstadt, Frederick Edwin, Church. These are common artists. I'll show you some of their paintings in a minute. And then James Audubon did his own thing. Very different style, same purpose, right? Pause the video, get these notes, and let's walk through some of these images. So here you can see this big, beautiful painting, and there's actually a person in the painting. You can blow it up and look for them. The idea is human beings live in harmony with nature instead of intruding on nature. Here's another one, and we have this big, beautiful landscape. You can see the fishermen here. You can see the little house in the village. It's all harmonious. Human beings and nature just living side by side. Here's another one again. I think this one is Church. He did a really good job. And then with Audubon here, you can see the prairie grouse, a bird species. So that's the kind of art we're talking about there. Okay, so now that you've got all these notes, your next task is to go in and do this Google form. You know how these work by now. You've got questions. Some of them you're going to know if you listened to yesterday's video. Some of them you definitely need the reading form. So once you have the notes in the Google form, you are done ski for the day. Fresh video coming at you tomorrow.